Hello, everyone. I'd like to call to order the work session on first quarter budget revisions, and I'd like to welcome everybody to our work session this afternoon. And we can start by going around the table and introducing ourselves, and we'll start here right here.
My name is Kate Byard. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer. Marilyn Bonda, O&B.
Pete Peterson, Assembly. I'm still Assembly.
Bill Evans.
Jennifer Johnston.
L.B. Gray Jackson, Chair of the Assembly's Budget Finance Committee.
Dan Sullivan, Mayor.
And can the folks in the audience please introduce yourselves too, please?
Glenda Gibson, AWW's Finance Director.
Okay,
Bonnie Bowman, BZA.
thank you.
Dennis Miller, Attorney. Jared Missouri, KPA.
Christine President, O&B.
We're doing introductions, young lady. What's your name? And yours? Thank you. And over here?
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Freddie Baker, Mayor's Office.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Thank you. Ms. Garrett, the floor is yours.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Well, if I could,
Oh,
Madam
did you
Chair.
introduce yourself?
Yes, I did, but I always kind of open up with just a couple of brief
Sorry
remarks.
about
to-
that. Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And Kate and Marilyn will be doing the majority of the presentation. What we have is a number of information sheets that we typically provide, including what our fund balance calculations are, some of the departments and how we got to the fund balances that we've achieved. Certainly what we're proposing for additional expenses for the 2015 revised, and then finally how we're going to pay for those expenses, including using one-time monies for one-time expenses, as much as possible. So we'll walk through that and gladly try and answer any questions. It's again, we're in a comfortable position where we have the opportunity to use excess revenues to take care of some of our liabilities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Geyer.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Chair. So we're had a preliminary presentation to the Budget and Finance Committee yesterday of the operations. And you'll also be getting information in your packets about that. So we didn't overly burden you with 2014. Tried to give you summary information. And I would like to walk you through these. There's only a few slides, so it wouldn't take very much of your time. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot is what is lapse? So we wanted to show you 2014 performance. It's unaudited. We explained to you yesterday that the numbers do change, but that the controller assures us that any changes from this point forward should be minimal. So area-wide general fund, what I've described for you is the municipality looks at revenues as being user fees, taxes, and other sources generally coming from outside in. Fund balance appropriated to support the budget is kind of comes from inside. So when the controller talks about revenues or the treasurer talks about revenues, they disassociate revenues and fund balance, even though both are used to support the operating budget. So that's what we try to show you in this first two columns are the fees of $745 million and the $15 million of fund balance that was appropriated mostly for one-time items. So then you get a total funding sources of $760 million. I want to let you know that does include ASD. So we're giving you the big picture of the municipality. General government's budget didn't grow that much. And also funding sources used. So you see that ASD kind of comes in and goes out, and that leaves you a lapse. And lapse is your funding sources minus your funding used gives you the lapse number that people are generally very curious about.
Ms. Garrett, can you hold up for a minute? I'd like to recognize Mr. Trainee for the record. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Trainee, we're just on the first page. We
Thank you, ma'am.
haven't proceeded very far into it. So we show you the lapse in all of the 5 majors, and then we kind of compress the lapse into the service areas. And in the service areas is actually included the Community Planning Fund, what you know as Fund 181. So those are the numbers that are generated when you come up with 11.6 million. Any questions on this slide? I'll just move forward unless you, I don't know if you guys have seen this before, so if you have questions, if not, I'll just push you forward. So then you have a lapse, and I want to call your attention to the next slide, which is an accountant slide, so it's rather busy. It has a lot of information on it, but there's a line there that, well, it says total, but it should say lapse. It's 2.9 million. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. That that lapse number that goes across is the same number that we were looking at on the other sheet. So this shows you fund balance beginning, it reconciles your fund balance portion by saying, you know, how does your operations impact your fund balance overall? And what you see on the top part of this slide is that your operations increased fund balance in the 5 major funds because you had lapse. So that left you with an increase in fund balance, for example, for 101 of 19 million, it left you a remaining fund balance. And then what do we do with that fund balance? How come not all of it is available? And you well know that you do a 10% set aside, a 2% set aside. The accountants make you reserve some for inventory prepaids and long-term loans. And if you ask me, I wouldn't be able to tell you what those are right now, but they're in the audited financial statements. And then there's the reserve for the property tax appeals, which you've heard about in the past. So those are how fund balance then gets allocated and kind of set aside. Then there's really available money, which is applied to the budget. And in this year...
Ms. Guard, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what page are you on? Because I don't think
It's on
that
page
page...
2.
Yeah. What was there was not...
This is
Yeah.
intense.
Thank you.
It was on page 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. This
I won't
page.
go over
Yeah.
that all
Yeah.
again.
Thank
so
you.
now where we are
You're
is
right,
on
Mayor, page 3,
fund
I'm
balance
sorry.
applied to the 2015 budget. It's the 4th line from the bottom. You recall that we applied 1.2 million of fund balance to the 2015 original budget. And we're going to, that left a negative in the fund balance after you do all your set-asides. And what the municipality does is it taxes to make that fund whole. And this is a practice that it's done for years and years and years. So that little negative that you see is going to be captured in the tax calculation. So at the end, you have, in all of the funds, you have a fund balance that's being applied either through reserves or to support the budget, so that at the end, your fund balance numbers have been fully allocated out, with the exception of roads and drainage. And this is an instance where the controller made a late adjustment after we prepared the budget presentation. So these are the types of adjustments that just happened. So you'll notice many people comment about building safety, Fund 181. So we showed it to you, segregated it out here so that you could see how that negative fund balance is changing. And your goal was to reduce that negative fund balance in Fund Balance 181 over a very short period of time if possible. So you see that you started the year with a negative fund balance of 2.8 million. That's on the top column, fund balance January 1, under Building Safety Fund 181. And you're ending the year with a negative balance of 1,881. So your operations has offset, which is what you wanted, that what we would normally call in the private sector accumulated loss, or a negative fund balance.
So we reduced it by $1 million essentially.
That's correct. Again, this is a busy sheet, but I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of how fund balance works, how it's allocated out, give you some assurance that you meet those set-asides that are so important to you, and that you can move forward and use the excess to support the operating budget. Okay. This next slide. This next slide just tries to give you a sense of where did that lapse come from, what departments, how did it work out, and the large one you notice is information technology. That's depreciation and debt repayment on the SAP system that did not get used, and some other contracts that weren't expended. So that money just fell to the bottom line and participated in developing fund balance and lapse. I think most of you are familiar with the other changes. The light winter resulted in a very good return for Public Works. So that was just an overview of 2014 results of operations. You'll hear more about it as the audit is done in the audit committee. We didn't want to overburden you too much in this session, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions from anybody?
You are going to get detailed financial statements in the audited statement this year. have a lot more data to look at than you have in the last few years. So you'll be getting familiar with these numbers as Marilyn and I are.
Thank you for that. You know, I really appreciate it.
So the next part really is something that I'm going to do on behalf of Marilyn because I have a voice that projects a little easier than Marilyn, but really the source of the information, and I'll turn to Marilyn for questions, and I'm sure she'll head me if I do it wrong. So the overall, the next page is the MOA, General Government Overall Summary. And an important thing to look at is property taxes. There's tax relief in this budget of $1.6 million. So we have used other local source revenues, and when you look at that number of $5.7 million, that's the solid waste services dividend that we've talked to you about of $5 million, and then an ongoing 5% dividend from solid waste services refuse. IGC allocations went down, and we used $6.1 million of fund balance. So we just talked about fund balance on the other page. If you flip back, you can see that $6.1 million is allocated out to fund balance, giving us total revenue increases of $9 million, which meet our expenditure demands of $9 million. So we've broken it down for you on the expenditure side why there's $9 million of increase in costs. Labor obviously is a significant one, and we have a few slides back that can talk
Would
about
you
that.
like questions while you're,
Yeah,
okay.
I have my glasses on, so I can't really see you because I'm trying to look at the
No, okay, understood.
Okay, just a question I've got on the total revenues under Delta, the approved budget, 9 million.
Yes.
How much portion of that did you say comes out of solid waste collection?
The line that says other local revenues, sir, 5.7 million,
Okay.
that's solid waste services. There's a one-time dividend of 5 million. and
So
then
if we
there's-
didn't take that, what would the bottom line total revenues actually look like?
It would be 3.3.
3.1?
3.3?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So, staying on this page for just 1 second, labor, non-labor and other, we identify, and then we've identified 3.2 million of one-time expenditures. Turning the page. It's a little clearer for you, answering your question, Chairman Cheney, about the other revenues. By and large, they net out all these other hotel motel ones, but I do want to call your attention to the top bar and tobacco tax. Dan Moore wanted me to tell you that what he's seeing in his trends are people are not smoking as much, and the younger children, the younger people who are smoking are moving towards vapor, and we do not tax vapor cigarettes. So you're seeing what Dan predicts is an overall decline in that revenue source. And it's a very difficult item to predict. We talked to Dan a lot about the $500,000 decline, but he feels confident, so we feel confident.
Mr. Trainee?
Okay, when we did the increase in tobacco tax, we knew that he was either going to go up or we're going to have people reduce their use of tobacco. Either way, that was the goal of raising the increase in tax. So, sounds like it's achieving what we wanted. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele?
Did we get money from the tax lawsuit? Has that been applied already?
Through the chair, no, the money has not been applied. They are in, Dan anticipates that we should get, I believe he said up to $3 million, but he wasn't really sure what periods of time that revenue would fall in. And if you like, we can have him send you an email on that.
If he's got more information.
If you would.
We'll have him send you an update. Again, many of these, much of this comes from Dan Moore, and we went over in very detail. He's quite confident. We believe that APD counter fees should go up as a result of having more police on the force. And Dan was seeing a trend downward in traffic fines, but up in trial court fines, so it really kind of washes it out. By and large, most of these revenues are you know, they washed one another out with the exception of the solid waste services dividend. The next page is our ongoing expenditure adjustments. Now, what we mean by ongoing expenditures are these are continuation type expenditures, things that will move forward into the next year, 2016. Many of these you are familiar with. Some of these came from the assembly, but the increase in the audit and other costs. So, a substantial amount of these costs are personnel costs.
Ms.
Your-
Scott, I have a question, please.
Yes,
Sorry to
Madam
interrupt
Chair.
you. But the assembly audit, you have 144,000. I thought we appropriated 200,000.
This is the change, so we're looking at the change, and maybe perhaps Barbara Jones would answer that. Go ahead.
Yes, it does represent a portion of the municipal audit that was previously unbudgeted.
Oh, we're not talking about, okay, we're talking about the independent financial audit.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking about the SAP audit. Thank you.
So we have increases in APDA, IAFF are budgeted, IBEW, mayor's office, and the treasury. The mayor got a very, very small increase, so we put that in the budget. It's really in the rounding, sadly. And SAP, we talked to you about at the last work session that we were going to put in full-time SAP resources to support the ongoing implementation activities, and we added individuals to IT to do business management work, and we added functional and technical resources. So
And
that
just to
was-
clarify, the mayor didn't get an increase, but his office did. So.
Yes, it was, I did my best.
Now, those lunches you're serving over there, Mayor.
Shameful.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, we did sell some property, I guess that's Heritage Land Bank. Does that show up, does that come back in here in this budget? I see that the real estate, where
101.
do we have it? We had a loss, or negative up there in terms of real estate services. I'm not quite sure about the balance between real estate and Heritage Land Bank.
Paul was down there in his police car.
Through the chair, real estate services are a general government function,
Okay.
whereas Heritage Land Bank is its own its own fund, its own
And
entity
it's-
aside. So I would,
Its money stay within its budget, and its budget is
Yes, it
separate
does.
from? It's not reported through this mechanism, or is it?
It is included as part of general government operating, but the expenditures and revenues.
It's
stay
like an
within the
enterprise,
fund.
it's in some respects shown.
Yeah, they stay within the fund.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Ms. Johnston?
I just, the personnel, as far as the adjustments, so are those assuming contract approvals of all?
so Malin, why don't you describe to Jennifer?
As far as the personnel adjustment, the 2.4, and it includes APDEA and IAFF, and is that assuming that we have agreement on our agreements?
Through the chair, yes, it assumes, well, the APDEA and IBEW, with the exception of IAFF, the budget is according to the contracts. The IAFF is, we have an assumption, just a contingency for the contract since it's not approved yet.
Yeah, we had budgeted originally a 1.5% increase for personnel, and the contracts are slightly above that with APDEA and IBEW, and a guess for IAFF being in the similar range. So we have to basically appropriate more money based on what the contracts actually ended up being.
And then maybe I'm getting ahead, but what was laid on the table on Tuesday night has the fire department with an increase of 1.6 or thereabouts. And is that all in here, or is that just, does that include non-labor too?
I'm not sure what you're
Well,
referring to.
We have,
Adjustments.
we will look at that and get you an
Okay.
answer.
As I say, I'm always skittish about asking questions without going through the whole PowerPoint, so maybe my,
Yeah, it's no worries, we'll get you an answer on that.
Anything else, Ms. Johnson? Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to turn to the one-time expenditure adjustments. These are one-time items that have been proposed in our budget. There were items that were carried from 2014. They were approved, you approved them in the budget, but the actions or the activities didn't take place sufficiently so that we could pay those invoices. So that money moves over into 2015, and that's at the will of the mayor, whether he wanted to put those forward. And these are the ones that he wanted to put forward, $254,000. So that's not an uncommon transaction. The rest of these are 2015 items, which none of them are particularly significant, other than the mayor has said for a long time he's in favor of another police academy, and so that is in his budget.
You'll notice too, towards the bottom, it's not a large amount, but we had made a commitment to the tenants of the John Thomas building that we would help with their relocation, so this allows funding to give them $5,000 per tenant. The building has been sold, and so we're going to help out the tenants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Trainer.
Mr. Mayor, appreciate that. How many organizations still are in that building?
I believe there's 4, and so we that would be 20,000, but we put 25 just in case there's an unusual circumstance. That
Well, thanks for doing that,
Yeah.
those organizations, Mayor.
Yep.
Okay. The next page is the tax limit calculation. Mayor, would you feel comfortable going through this? Sorry.
Can we go back
Yeah.
to the expenditure adjustments? Can you give a little more detail on the, well, I understand the mayor transition, because that's like usually about $65,000, but the executive cash outs, can you give us a little explanation of what that's, because I've never seen anything like that before. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, one of those includes the retiring internal auditor. That contributes to the large number, and also leave cash outs on behalf of the entire mayor's office, municipal manager. So that's why
Okay,
the number is.
so retiring internal auditor? Our internal auditor is retiring?
He is.
Really?
Yeah. He's
Wow.
going to retire in April. We've asked him to stay through the end of my tenure.
Well,
He's
since
agreed to
he
do that.
reports to both of us, it's really great to know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I
Kind of
understand
just found
now.
out ourselves.
Yeah,
so-
wow. Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Geyer. Please continue.
And just to add to that, there's usually an assumption that, with the mayor's office, that, with a new mayor, that many of those positions will indeed be transitioned, and so we want to make sure we budgeted for leave cash out for the folks that'll be leaving.
Fair enough. Mr. Training?
So is this a potential for all the execs to cash or leave out, Mayor, or just your office and the city manager?
This just has my office and the meeting manager.
Okay, but you could have other executives in other departments.
You could, yes, and I think all the other departments probably have the capability to, within their existing budgets, to deal with it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Are there any other questions on this page?
Doesn't look like it. Thank you.
So, this is an excerpt from the tax limit calculation, and it's just a portion that shows the starting point of 20, you have the components of the calculation or by the row, and we show 2014 where it ended, where the property taxes to be collected last year in 2014 were $239 million. That carries forward to 2015 and becomes the base. And we don't see the base calculation, but what on the slide, we do have handouts of the complete calculation if you'd like them as I go through. The slide starts at the limit on all taxes that can be collected. That limit is reduced by non-property taxes to get to the limit on property taxes that can be collected. The non-property taxes that changed in that are represented in this calculation and had changes, they're also represented in the budget. So with every reduction in non-property tax, there's a possibility to collect property tax. So that's what the limit on property taxes that can be collected represents, the $250,313,000 item. Then there is no use of ASD capacity, but what we do show on the second line from the bottom is property taxes to be collected, the $246 million, which is what was used to balance the revised budget as presented, which is $3.8 million under the cap. And this is only, the tax cap applies to only the 5 major funds. So in addition to the $246 million for the 5 majors, there's also $17 million in the, basically the road service areas.
Ms. Johnston?
What do we have now as far as tax capacity from the unused ASD portion?
It's about $7 million. I can get the exact
Yeah,
number for you.
okay. And then, okay, never mind. I've answered my own question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Please continue.
So taking continuing on with the taxing, what we are showing here is the taxpayer impact. So starting with the total taxes to be collected, we're showing for the comparison of 2014 or last year and this year. On the MOA side, the increase to 2015 was 8.4 million, and that is inclusive of service areas, so it's the 5 majors plus the service areas. ASD is also obviously taxed to all the citizens, so we're including the impact of their approved budget of $240 million to total $504 million of taxing. And then how that equates to mill levies. The mill levies actually went down from last year due to a change in assessment, increase in assessed values, which results in per $100,000 home a decrease of a savings of $29 per $100,000.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston?
So you still have in the ASD tax cap the 2.5 or 2.2 million that goes with the budget that we passed a couple weeks ago. Do you remember in their budget, they assumed that they were going to get the one-time only funding, that the legislature is making the same assumption, and they're going to come back and revise. So you still have that in here, right?
Through the chair, yes, this represents the approved budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Please continue.
That concludes the presentation on the budget.
I have a question, please. Okay, and maybe I'm just missing something. But I'm looking at page 11, the total taxes to be collected on 2015, 504. And then if you look at page 10, the limit on all taxes to be collected is 313 million. I'm just a little bit confused with the vast difference in numbers.
Okay, so the 313 is the tax cap after you do the adjustments for population and growth
understand.
and those increases. And then it reduces, it's all reduced by these other revenues that offset the amount that you can collect. So that brings it down to the 253.13. Does that answer your question,
No,
Madam Chair?
it doesn't. But that's okay, because we can talk offline. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this right now. Thank you. Please continue. Ms. Johnson? Thank you.
I gotta see if sorry, it took me a minute. I,
Sorry.
I was glad, I was looking at your presentation today, I was comparing it to our 6-year fiscal plan, and it seems to fit within the same realm. And I was just, my question, I guess, back to the personnel costs, the adjustments there. I just would be interested in the carrying cost of those additional expenses as they go out. That cost.
Yes, and Ms. Johnson, we're starting the 6-year fiscal plan in May. So we'll be working with the Budget Advisory Commission, Planning and Zoning after their request that we start early. So we will be working on the 6-year fiscal plan beginning in May with those two groups.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Please continue.
So there were some, we wanted to provide you with information by which we based our decision to take a one-time dividend from solid waste services, which I'm very confident is something that solid waste services can live within. So I wanted to hand these out to you. I really shouldn't even be touching these. I'm sorry. Do you want to pick a clean one off the top?
That's okay. I'll
Okay.
be all right.
Does that mean we're gonna be contaminating cake?
I shouldn't touch them. I just need one for myself. Thank you.
I think I've already gotten it.
Well, you're excused, Ms. Johnson.
Could you go sit over there?
I thought I'd sit in the middle.
Yeah, for those legal people, you left them in your office and you regret it no matter what you do.
So we spent a lot of time looking at solid waste in the chair. Shall I proceed, Madam Chair?
Please, thank you.
I don't want to take too much time of yours with this, but we were very surprised, to tell you the truth, when we started looking at solid waste services refuse, of the tremendous impact that the rate increase that the Assembly approved in the past had on the financial status, because I think you were concerned about its financial status in the past, and you really remediated that. So I wanted to show you those revisions. So this is just a kind of an outlook that I prepared. Thank you. Whoever did that. And it's simplistic, but it shows you, I think, the impact of your changes. So the 2013 audited balance, if you look down at the bottom, there's a line that says net income or loss. So 2013, this entity had a net income of $24,000, something that you were probably aware of. 2014 is the year that they had the opportunity to put in the rate change, but not all the other improvements that they wanted. They didn't get, I think it's an 8-yard or a 6-yard cart out in time to get benefit that full year. They got it in the fall or really late, maybe early winter. Even though that was the case, refuse made a net income of $2.1 million. So a huge, tremendous difference in the stature and the ability of the company to generate and support its own revenues. And what I did is, this is a simplistic, the auditors would not like this, but this would not meet their criteria for a cash generated, because I didn't do the change in the balance sheet. But if you look at depreciation, which is, under operating expenses, and you add the cash, so for me, for 14, I took 905 plus the 2.1 million. That gave me roughly the cash generated from operations for this entity of 3 million. So when I saw that number being generated, that huge step forward for this entity, and then I looked at a 10-year balance sheet and I saw how their cash had grown over the years, I felt very confident that we could pull cash out of this entity and it would still move forward. But we wanted to do a little bit more. So we looked at the 2015 budget, because maybe 14 was just a great year. So we looked at their budget that was proposed. Again, their depreciation went up because they purchased equipment. Their other costs go up because we take out that one-time dividend. That's way at the bottom, right above their net income of $542,000. That's a new add in the budget, so it's a reduction of their net income. So they make, in 2015, $968,000. They have $1.2 million of depreciation. So they generate in their cash $2.2 million. So again, taking into consideration the dividend that we have placed in our budget, they still make 2.2 million, they generate cash. So then the natural question you'd have is, well, they have a CIP, Kate. We don't want to drain their cash so they can't fund their ongoing build out. So then we said, well, let's look at that 6-year capital plan. Marilyn pulled the numbers for me. So we show that they're generating the cash to meet those capital demands, tune of 1.25. So we went through. Now that's not true for 2016. They have a bigger capital plan in 16. They don't generate sufficient cash. So then I said, okay, well, they generated $1.2 million in the year before. We leave them after taking $5 million with 2.7 native cash available to them. So they certainly have enough cash to offset that 82,000. And then moving forward, they still generate sufficient cash. So I just thought that might help you understand why we felt comfortable putting that one-time item in the budget. Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Steele? Did you have a-
No? It's,
Now, does this budget timeline figure the 2 trucks that they're
Yes,
asking for in there
we
that
did
we haven't
not-
passed yet?
Through the chair, they have reserved funds. So when we talk about their $7.7 million, that's in their reserve. That's not available cash. So their available unreserved cash is one number, and then they reserve cash for their operating, for their capital budget down below.
And does
So-
it reflect their work plan to increase their recycle program, which is going to require some expenditure for boxes and setting it up, I guess, there
Through
at
the
site?
chair, we didn't have knowledge of anything beyond their CIP, which is where they really should be putting their plans.
Well, supposedly, well, I don't know if it is or not.
So we use the information that was presented to us by Solid Waste Services. And certainly, if they wanted to move into other entities, we have recommended to them that the first thing that they need to do is a cost of service study. So they need to look at their costs. They didn't do that before.
Are we getting that in this analysis that we're paying for?
No, a cost of service study is a regulatory process where you look at all the costs of your operations and you spread your revenues and costs accordingly. And they need that, and we've been talking to about that. And then they would have a basis of saying, for example, we learned that Waste Connections, which many of you know, charges $11.50 a month for recycling. But your rate for solid waste services in the downtown area is an embedded rate. Well, it may be that recycling is costing more. So maybe that embedded rate might no longer cover all those costs of recycling as more and more people pick it up. So you have a rate differential so I maybe call it a rate opportunity, growth opportunity in your revenues.
Well,
So there's
all their rates are below the
Right.
competition.
And there's a whole bunch of cool things that make refuse a very interesting operation, probably for someone who would want to acquire it.
They're gonna have to do
Because
something
it
in
does
terms
have a lot
of the
upside.
fair aspect as well, in terms of cans.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Anyway, we'll argue that at a later date.
Okay.
Thank you,
And the final
Mr.
page- I'm sorry,
One moment,
Madam
please.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Steele, Mr. Training, and Ms. Johnson.
Kate, when is the study due to us?
A cost of service study?
Now on selling, the study we paid for
Yes.
on selling it, when's it due to us? Going to physically be here in the state.
Yeah. As I mentioned at the assembly meeting, we've received it in draft. We're reviewing it internally. I would think we should be able to have it to the assembly early next week.
Okay, I'd just like to get it as soon as we can, so some members can look at it before it
Yeah,
comes to
So we'll have
us.
it for the hearing, certainly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate.
And the final page is something that's probably not a surprise to
One,
you.
Kate, one
I'm
moment,
sorry,
please.
Madam Chair.
That's okay, Ms. Johnson.
I don't know if it's this cold or the cotton head or whatever it is, but I'm slightly confused. So your suggestion of the 5.5 dividend is projecting forward funds 16, 17, and 18, and including 2014 and 2015?
Let me explain that. I can understand, Madam Chair, I can understand why it's confusing. And that is that my goal in 2014 is 2.7 million. That's how much available cash is left for solid waste after the $5 million one-time dividend. So
Okay.
they've left with 2.7 million. And then to start in 15, we had taken it in 14, they generate 1.2 million net cash to carry forward as well. So their cash is still building in 15, and then it goes down a little bit in 16, and then their cash builds again. And I tried to show you the cumulative build of 5.5 million over that period of time is what that total is. It could be much clearer, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Please continue.
Yes, the next page was something that was presented to us when we had a review, because we wanted to be sure when we did this exercise that there weren't any unknowns and that we had our feet were on solid foundation. So in 2003, we learned a $2.5 million one-time dividend was appropriated from refuse. I didn't go back and show you their revenues and their cash from that period of time, but I did want to show you that at one time that was done. And then that was done as a one-time item in the first quarter budget revision. And these are the dividends that were taken between 2004 and 2014. And you can see that there was a substantial undertake of dividends from what the Assembly could have taken. Again, at those times, their rates probably were not in a place where you felt comfortable taking that dividend. That's my presentation, Madam Chair.
I have a question, okay? On the second page, the current year utility revenue distribution. For 2014, I'm not sure about 2012 and 2015, but for 2014 you have 0.
There was no, for 2015, we do have, we could have made 2015 in here, which would have made it clear, but there was nothing taken during the fiscal or the calendar year 2014. There was no dividend taken.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Well, I have some different information.
Okay.
You know that there was a utility distribution or MUSA, whatever you want to call it,
There is.
for 2014. You know, and budgeted for 2015.
Madam Chair, you are correct. There's MUSA, and this is a 5% utility dividend calculated on their revenue. So
Right.
it would be an addition to MUSA.
Okay, so
So all these years, there was no additional 5%, like you receive a 5% dividend from MLMP.
okay, so current year utility revenue distribution is something different than MUSA, is what you're saying?
Yes. It's
Okay.
I should say dividend instead of
It's not a utility.
distribution.
Anyway, thank you.
No,
Please
that wasn't
continue.
clear. I apologize.
That's okay. I'll have some questions offline.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for us, Madam Chair.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any questions? No? Well, I guess we can all go home early. Wow, meeting's adjourned.